Let's get some analysis for you now and speak to Angelo Fick, who is the Director of Research at Auwal Socio-economic Research Institute. Angelo, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Certainly, when you listen to different leaders of the ANC, they do admit what a beating they got at, the 2024 polls, and they say that they now want to regroup and also reclaim lost ground. When you look at this ANC that says on Saturday it wants to deal with the current contemporary challenges in the state of the party, where does it begin?
It certainly doesn't begin by going and looking back into the very distant past. If you have a party president visiting the sacred site of Robben Island and talking about visiting graves and previous presidents visiting graves, celebrating a birthday by looking at death and deaths is a really odd way of doing it, but I think it reveals something about an African National Congress that is, in a sense, really stuck in a moment. It's what Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, would have called an interregnum. The old cannot die and the new cannot be born. The ANC cannot seem to shed itself of many of the habits it had picked up in government over the last 30 years, and it cannot begin to embrace the new habits required for it to recover from what had happened in the middle of 2024.
So what does it mean then, particularly when they talk about, the previous statements, when you look at them, they say that they want to address challenges at branch level and they want to look at the quality of their membership then. So if they're not able to do what you're saying in 30 years, how much of this work at branch level can be done?
And they've said this since at least 2015. There is the infamous Gallagher Estate moment at which the then president of the party announces that party membership had declined, and the Deputy Secretary General runs through the press and media galleries explaining that the numbers had been got wrong and that the president was reading the wrong numbers. Political education of members of the African National Congress has been an ongoing concern year on year, and it's not necessarily clear how it is that that has been addressed, given the behavior of ANC members in various of their own meetings. And one thinks here also of the ways in which all of those so-called re-educated members of the party weren't able to convince ordinary South Africans to vote for them in enough numbers to get a clear majority. So this is not just internal strife for the party. This is the first time where they've been in weaker positions historically as an organization, but that was when they were not sitting on top of government control and being expected to deliver in relation to that. And so the glorious movement of the glorious past is, I think, a mistake for the ANC to harp on about. They sit in a country that is in crisis, in a world that is in crisis, and there isn't, for me, enough, I don't hear enough of the leaders of the ANC looking ahead and beginning to address the challenges that they've created, as well as the challenges they inherited, that will have to be dealt with by the majority young country. When 60 and 70-year-old people want to talk about things that happened in 1980, the majority of South Africans alive today do not recall it. In fact, the majority of South Africans alive today are younger than the 1994 birth date of this new country.
And that's the nub of it, right? Because it seems that, I don't know, is it a struggle? Is it a not knowing? Or is it, I'm not sure what it is when it comes to addressing what these young people want to hear. Is it because they simply don't know how to tackle those issues or to speak to them?
I don't think the African National Congress and its leaders are the only people in this country who have this problem of a demographic divide between leadership and the majority of the country. One thinks of a recent religious organization that appointed 3 people in their 8th decade of life to investigate issues, as if there aren't millions of young South Africans with those skills and with those qualifications who can do that far more adeptly. We now have people who were schooled in the 20th century who want to talk about the 21st century, but don't seem to be paying attention to any of the not paying attention to any of the ways in which that could be and should be talked about far more productively. If you have an economic and employment crisis, the solutions are not the kinds we've seen so far. If you have a literacy crisis, you don't have the situation where old people talk about the value of education and how that's going to lead to liberation, when hundreds of thousands and millions of young people can only attest to how that tertiary education has left them in debt. And so one wants to ask these leaders, when it is that they're going to listen to younger people who are younger than I am, who certainly are better qualified, have researched this issue. We have 26 universities in this country. There's absolutely no reason for the African National Congress or any of these other organizations to continue to listen to people who have qualified for SASSA cards. We really should not be a gerontocracy at the top when we have a youthful population, some of whom have the skills and should be contributing to the solutions. And that, for me, is, I think, the African National Congress struggle. And when the president of the party invokes the Youth League and their remarks about radical economic transformation or economic liberation, one wants to think about the irony bells going off, because this is, after all, a billionaire who's telling a majority poor country that the party, the organization that he leads, will somehow, in their 31st year, do what they haven't done in the 30 years prior to that, longer than most of these people have been alive.
Speaking about the party, what do you read into the timing of former President Jacob Zuma's letter to the party?
Politics, of course. Jacob Zuma is a consummate politician, and to choose this particular week to launch that salvo is to test his antagonists in the party, and whether or not Fikile Mbalula, as the Secretary General, can go up against wit for wit, blow for blow against Jacob Zuma in a political battle remains to be seen. But it is also odd that Jacob Zuma wants back inside a party while leading another party if the party that he wants to rejoin or wants to be reinstated in has a constitution that clearly says you can't actually do this. But, we're sitting in a world in which these kinds of political maneuvers are now happening at us faster and faster, and not just in South Africa, but globally. And the question for Fikile Mbalula and for Jacob Zuma is, which one of them will blink first, and which one of them is likely to survive out this decade, if their organizations do at all?
Interesting times ahead, hey? Let's see what happens then. Angelo, appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And let's see what the statement has in store for the party members as well as the supporters at the weekend, just to, give them their marching orders, what becomes even some of the reflections of the party. That's Angelo Fick there, the Director of Research at Auwal Socio-economic Research Institute.